Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica, and I'm so excited to talk to Candis today. We're going to be talking all about mental health and witchcraft and just Candis's story as a witch and a practitioner. And so, yeah, let's just dive in. Would you like to introduce yourself, Candis, and tell everybody who you are, what you do?
Sure, I would love to. And thank you for having me, Angelica. So, my name is Candis Green. I like to say that I'm a registered and spooky psychotherapist. Um, I work, I say, mostly with final girls. Final girls are the ones who survive to tell the tale. So, I'm a therapist who helps final girls through traumatic experiences. I do a lot of kind of existential work, death and grieving work, dream work, and this is all really tied into how witchcraft can be a really supportive practice and tool for those navigating their mental health. So that's what I do there. I also have a podcast, Mental Health is Horrifying, where I explore how mental health themes are portrayed in the world of horror. It's just a natural kind of thing for me to talk about as a spooky ghoul. And I live in Toronto, Canada. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. That's so exciting. I love that. I just love that you use like the term final girl in terms of talking about who you work with. I just love that. I think that's so fun. And I think it is really like I found myself like thinking about that, being like, yeah, like that's a really great way to describe people who have sort of gone through traumatic experiences. And so I just think it's so cool. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on today. So, can you tell us a little bit about like your magical origins and, you know, what kind of started you off with witchcraft or the paranormal world or anything like that? What were like the origins for you?
Yeah, the origins is like I feel like I just came out of the womb like straight up as a witch, like a spooky ghoul. It was just a very natural attraction for me. I spent my childhood summers locked in the public library researching witchcraft, witch trials, Halloween, Satan, like every single summer I had any free time. This is what I was doing. And I was just completely drawn to this idea that there's a whole world beyond the veil and these practices. It just felt like a very natural connection for me. So I like to say, whether I knew it or not, I've been a witch my whole life and, started practicing very early on. And I think, like, as somebody who was a teenager in the 90s, like the whole 90s witch craze with things like The Craft, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, it was just like, this is where I belong. And so as I began moving into the mental health field, I really just saw these two things as a natural sort of fit and marriage together to help other people kind of tap into their own like witchy and psychic capabilities as a way to heal through trauma and understand themselves better.
Yeah. Did you feel like that idea in a way of like having the two come together sort of as your professional career developed, do you feel like that was based off of your experiences with witchcraft, or was it just sort of like something, and it could be totally different, or is it just something where you were like, I see how these two can really come together? Like, what do you think was like the initial thing that made you want to like link them?
Yeah, I think it was like my own. It wasn't, what I went into the profession wanting to lead with, but I had always, done sort of like moon magic and like there's a tarot reader I have always worked with and still continue to work with. And when I would kind of do these things and like have a tarot reading and we were going through the cards together, it would be things like, oh, this is really therapeutic. And like, this is a tool for understanding your inner psyche and understanding your own emotions as a reflection of like how you are feeling or, your inner archetypes or symbols. And so as I started kind of like going through the field, I discovered, modalities like Jungian psychotherapy. And it's like, if Carl Jung was not a witch, like he was definitely a witch. Like his orientation was all about this idea that we all have like inner magic and the universe is mysterious and unknown. So it was just like, check, check, check. Here we are.
Oh my goodness. I love that. Yeah, he was very witchy. He was totally like a magician or an occultist or something. I totally agree with you. Yeah, I love that. And it's so funny too because there's certain things that Jung like uh wrote about and like was a leader in the field about. Like for example, he wrote a lot about astrological synastry, which is so random. Like he was just like, yes, like and he came up with all these ideas of like synastry in the astrology chart. And it's funny, like you sometimes I'll be researching synastry and it's just like he's one of the leading people that were chatting about it, or at least sort of maybe had an early discussion about that topic in modern astrology. So I love that he was just kind of doing whatever was clicking for him. I love that. Amazing. Do you do you remember I guess I should say, like, did your witchcraft, I know you said you kind of like came out super witchy, which I love and I kind of resonate with as well. Do you feel like there were any like foundational things in your teenage years or your childhood that like kind of solidified like witchcraft for you, or like teen witch experiences or anything like that?
Yeah, I always like really connected with my intuition and just sort of like being able to know or sense things before they happened, or being able to kind of like read and understand people without them telling me much. And it was like not something I could ever like kind of explain or give like a rational reason to. So I definitely connected with that. And I think like for me, I really think that like Halloween was just like a portal and a gateway into this whole world. Like I have basically always celebrated Halloween year round, and gravitated to like horror and the spooky world and all of that from a very young age, to the point where like my parents had to put limits on me, like, Candice, we cannot have a Halloween party in June.
Oh my goodness.
So I definitely always like gravitated towards, yeah, witchy practices and Halloween and horror and spooky things. And then, yeah, in the 90s, like when it started becoming like more mainstream, with all of these representations of witches, I was like, oh my God, it's me. Like I exist. Like I am not the only one.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Um, yeah, I feel like I completely resonate with it as well. That's awesome. So, yeah, I'm so excited to talk about mental health and witchcraft because I just have like so many questions, so many ideas. I guess like the first thing that I would say is, or that I would ask is like, if somebody is, I guess, let me see. I'll start out by saying, like, if somebody is already a witch and kind of wants to engage with their mental health through witchcraft, maybe that's something that they haven't really tried before, how would you recommend they start doing that? And I guess I'm asking the question in terms of like, how to sort of take your practice and start thinking about it as something that can improve your mental health and can improve your self-expression and how you view yourself.
Yeah, a couple of things are coming up for me. So I think one that I notice for a lot of, witchy inclined people wanting to incorporate it into their mental health is actually shame.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of witches do want to work with me. This idea of like, oh, this is okay. This is a real thing. Like, this is therapeutic. Like, I am accepted. And so I think, like, working through those feelings of shame, or that are often, so imbued into us by, the culture that maybe says like witchcraft isn't real or this isn't okay. Like breaking down those blocks and navigating through those feelings to be able to accept, like, no, this is who I am. This is good, this is helpful, this is my practice, and giving yourself permission to lean into that as a form of healing and self-acceptance, I think is really important and can be
Mm.
incredibly therapeutic. Um, Leaning more towards the psychic realm, I encourage everybody I work with who is witchy inclined to keep a dream journal. This is a whole kind of universe of psychic material and kind of like, transmissions that we have access to when we fall asleep that I think like as a society we largely ignore, and developing a practice around dream work as a form of psychic healing and connection with your own innate psychic capabilities, which I believe we all have, can really like open this door to a whole world of healing and creating practices around that, creating artwork around your dreams, creating altars, connecting with, different deities or entities through your dreams and kind of communicating with them and having a relationship through that realm. It's like you will uncover things about yourself that were never possible when you were just living sort of with your like
Mm.
ego waking mind. So that's kind of like where I like to begin with people.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense because it's about the uncovering and the unveiling and finding, yeah, like using your psychic abilities and things like dream work and stuff like that, and reflections and tarot, and you mentioned, in order to find those deeper things that you probably wouldn't it wouldn't be the first thing that comes up when you wake up, like, oh yeah, I gotta talk about this, or I gotta work through this, right? It's sort of decoded, and I feel like it's probably, in a way, decoded for a reason. And not to say that we shouldn't unveil it, but I think that that's sort of um, a function of the brain, right? Is like, yeah, let's like, like let's like cipher things away. But I love this practice of dream work where you're able to unveil those things in a way that's really helpful and healing. I love that. Um, I find that sometimes, and I'm kind of like I have a very nuanced opinion on this because I see both sides of it, where like I see people being like, I wish we talked a little bit more about how spiritual people might experience things like spiritual psychosis or a variety of things like that. But then I also am kind of frustrated sometimes because I feel like any type of psychic experience or deity experience or something could be pathologized or could be seen as, oh, like, I don't know if that's really normative or something like that. And so I feel like I'm kind of in the middle with this, where it's like two extremes, or there's two sides of it. How do you kind of like navigate that? I feel like whenever I hear it being talked about, it's very cut and dry, where it's either like, spiritual experiences are all great and everything's fine and nothing bad can happen, or they're all bad, they're all, to be pathologized, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's such a good question and something like really important to think about. And I think like what we're talking about here is like, having a spiritual side, whether that be like a witchcraft practice or a religious practice, like while also, you know, being able to maintain a connection to like reality and the kind of the conscious mind. And so I think that is like a really important like distinction to look at. And like I think with any religion or spiritual practice, like there's always this connection and this work with the unknown, and
Mm.
where it sort of veers into like something maybe we need to, pay more attention to, be concerned about, or be considered with some psychosis is like a total detachment from reality and kind of, believing that, maybe you are not a part of this world or you are above this world. I think one of my favorite things about kind of witchcraft and that practice is like this like very real acknowledgement that we are nature, like we are,
Mm.
part of it, we're part of the world, we're not above it. So I think it's kind of really important to pay attention to those lines and distinctions, and to understand like this is a practice and a way and a part of your life, but it's not going to take over your entire kind of like notion of reality, relationships, life functioning, that sort of thing.
Mm, I love that. I think, yeah, that makes so much sense to me. That's like a perfect way to put it or to think about it. I love that. Yeah, and I think it's helpful. That's awesome. Um, yeah. So do you find like with your clients, like in terms of, I guess like I'm just curious, like how like I don't know, like how you kind of approach magic and psychic abilities and tarot and things like that, like in a session or something like that. Could you do you is that okay if you're like if you tell us a little bit about like how you use those things like in a therapeutic environment?
Yeah, of course. So of course I get, witches as clients, and they know that this is a space where, they will be completely understood and accepted in those practices. So that in itself is very healing, sort of from an attachment perspective. And even if you're not a witch or have no experience with tarot at all, the way that I set up my therapy sessions is I call them tarot talk therapy. And so what I do is, we begin, checking in, like what's going on. And throughout the session, I'll collaboratively decide with my clients, like, it seems like there's something here we want to understand more or know more about. Do you want to pull some tarot cards? And we'll decide, do we want to just pull one card? Do we want to maybe like do a little spread, kind of like with placements to understand certain things? And I always tell people, you don't need to have any knowledge or experience of tarot whatsoever. The way that we are using these cards in this session is to connect with our unconscious. So whatever is being shown to you now in these cards, I want you to tell me, what feelings are these evoking? What experiences is this bringing up? Are there certain symbols or archetypes that you are being drawn to? And we'll navigate the kind of issues through the lens of the card. And, of course, we can bring in sort of universal or spiritual meanings associated with each card, but I view tarot as a portal into the unconscious and sort of psychic realms. And it's truly incredible what can come through when you bring those cards into a session. So that's one way I kind of work with it. And of course, I always invite clients to bring in dreams, or we can set up a dream work session where we go deep into a dream and we embody different parts of it, and it's sort of like that thing you were saying earlier, like for this moment, like let's suspend reality just for right now, to kind of like free up our minds to play a little bit in the mystery of life and like understand like what's going on here from that perspective. Because sometimes, like, 3D conscious life, again, it's limiting, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
we need a little extra flavor to understand what's going on inside of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that perspective so much. And I find that it's kind of rare. Like I feel like I don't know, maybe it's just it's I mean, I live in Salem, Massachusetts, and I still am like kind of like where are all the witchy therapists? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean there are some, but I find myself just, sometimes being a little confused as to why there's not more because I feel like I see therapists of a lot of different faith backgrounds and stuff like that. But why do you feel like witchcraft or the even like work with the unconscious and that sort of thing? Do you feel like that's sort of like uncommon in clinical environments and why do you find that?
Girl, yes. And I can. So I'm from Canada. You obviously are American, and I understand like a little bit about the U.S. mental health system and how it's set up. I think it's quite different than in Canada, but my understanding of how it largely works in the US, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's largely like a medical based model that
Mm.
can largely be focused on like diagnosing if you want to get insurance coverage. And so within that model, it's very kind of medical science evidence based, which can of course be very helpful in certain circumstances, especially if we're diagnosing things like psychoses or things that require like medication. But because of the prevalence of this sort of model, things like more alternative spiritual approaches have traditionally been kind of like looked down upon in the profession. um, like this word like evidence-based is very popular,
Mm.
and we have to kind of look at like, okay, which types of studies or information receive funding or are looked at favorably in this field.
Mm.
And I have some stories, Angelica, about just really being like, even though like Jungian psychotherapy is like a recognized modality, you know, where I live in Ontario by the governing body of the profession, like so many people like look down at these sort of witchy approaches as like evil or not right, or not psychotherapy. And of course,
Mm.
that's just ridiculous. And I think it's a couple of things. It's our society's like, we're very focused on you know trying to fix things, trying to find like a solution. Like we love quick fixes, like, just
Mm.
give me a quick fix for this, like give me a pill or a 5-step plan. But kind of spiritual psychotherapy and like this more like unconscious witchy work, it's not a quick fix, and there aren't a lot of answers to things. That's sort of the whole point of just like dancing in the mystery of life. And secondly, I think it has a lot to do with, in North America, our cultures, I think, are very like Christian focused. So
Mhm.
you'll see a ton of like Christian therapists, which is all fine, knock yourself out. And no one would ever say anything about the legitimacy of that. But you say you're a witch, and it's like, like burn her at the stake. It's surprising for me to hear that, like, you would hope that in a place like Salem, with all that context, that people would have more of an appreciation for like, this is fine, let us not chase these people out of society,
Yeah. Yeah, been there, done that, not doing it again. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're totally right on the fact that like, even if I like just personally think about my therapeutic experiences, like a lot of it has been very much like, okay, cool. We found the problem. It's this. Here's the solution or something, or like, and that never seems to work, or maybe it does for some people. And I don't want to like yuck your yum, but it is very prescriptive. It is very like, cool. We found the problem. Here you go. Like what you said, like sort of that solution oriented. And when you were talking about evidence based, I just kept thinking to myself like, yeah, what evidence, like which evidence, like there's so much, like you said, like there's studies that aren't getting funding, and there's so much evidence that you could find or whatever. But yeah, I love that. Have you had like experiences with colleagues or with people who are just kind of like, what is happening?
In terms of being shady towards witchy therapy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like when I was in graduate school, like at the school I was at, some faculty members were so like either low key or high key disapproving of my approach to this, imbuing me with so much shame around like my innate knowledge that this is healing, this is psychotherapy, this is helpful. That there was a moment where I considered leaving the profession, because I was like, if I can't practice in a way that I know is right, in a way that I know is helpful, that taps into my gifts, then like what the hell is the point of this?
Mhm.
But the one thing that has been really kind of nice, about just, being the stubborn girl that I am and continuing down this path is how many other witchy psychotherapists I have come across, just by, connecting with them online and seeing that there are so many other psychotherapists, in the United States and Canada who are doing this work, who see its benefit, and that part is really amazing, and who are like trying to bring awareness to like showing you a picture of something on a card and asking you how you feel is very therapeutic and helpful and is not evil.
Yeah, it's not evil. I'm like, ugh. Yeah, and like, you know, I don't know. I feel like that happens a lot. Like when I think about my therapeutic experiences, like a lot of it has been like, let's think about a memory, or let's think about, this moment that you're describing, and let's see how we're feeling, and let's tap into that, and let's like I it almost is like I'm bringing up an image in my mind, and I'm considering like what happened, and I'm almost seeing it like a story, or I'm viewing it from the future, looking at the past, and it does feel really witchy, like, in terms of just how we're viewing time in our lives and how things have shaped us. Like, I have conversations like that all the time, when I'm reading tarot, or when I pull a card and I'm like, oh yeah, there's something coming up about the past, there's, it's almost like a similar thing. And I can see how it can be so helpful and so therapeutic in terms of like just bringing them together rather than keeping them really separate and rigid. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And like that, evokes like this concept of like synchronicity, right? Like things,
Mm.
happen for a reason and symbols are reflected and come up for you. And it's like this idea that often when we're processing like traumatic memories or experiences, like talking about them is often not actually helpful or therapeutic.
Mhm.
Like it can actually serve to re-traumatize the person to talk about it and go through the experience again, like verbally. So working with things like symbols, metaphor, like storytelling in sort of a narrative way, or dreams,
Mm.
is this really nice way of like talking about things in a more like approachable metaphorical sense that is not so literal, that makes it easier to access feelings and experiences that are difficult. um,
Mm.
and actually I wanted to mention, like, as a student of your of the heart program right now, it's like, doing, a lot of like these exercises around like spell work and magic and connecting with your innate gifts, like it helps you like again connect with some of those like unconscious parts that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was here, and maybe this is this block or this organizing principle I have inside of me is like what is preventing me from, fully embodying my magic, or fully embodying myself, or fully believing that like I can do this, or I am
Mhm.
allowed to have that relationship, or, do that thing I really want to do. So good job, Angelica.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like um the reason why I have that approach is because I mean, I think I've personally found it to be the most helpful. So maybe there's a little bit of like anecdotal, like I find it helpful, but I it comes from what I don't see in what I wish was happening, what I wish the dialogue was. So yeah, I'm glad it's working. And you enjoy it. And I find, I feel like I am kind of a very, like, I really resonate with everything about the unconscious and all that kind of stuff. I've always been really interested in that. Maybe it's because of my work with death deities and underworld deities. I'm kind of curious. Is deity work a part of your practice at all?
Yeah, I've really recently started connecting with Nike.
Mm.
I love her. She's my gal. I'm really drawn to her. So Nike, she is the goddess of victory. And I like to say, as a vengeful Scorpio, I love victory. As she cackles.
Mhm.
But one of the reasons I've been really drawn to her is like not so much, but maybe, who knows, right? Like in a witchy sense, as part of like my personal mental health practice, and what I really encourage others to do is physical fitness. Like it's so important in maintaining your mental health. Like I can't talk about it or impress that upon people enough. I've always been really into sports. And when I play a sport or do any type of fitness, I always want to win and be the best. And that is like a really strong kind of like driving force for me, and like connecting to kind of like honestly like a liminal state you can sort of access when you're engaging in sport, or like really hard
Mm.
exercise. You kind of leave your mind and just go into your body, and you kind of go somewhere else, is like really important to me. So that's why I love Nike. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
That's so cool. I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like there is something too with Nike with the idea of like victory being like coming after a long experience, or like a strenuous experience, or something that isn't always super simple or easy. And I think that that can be inspiring, because again, I feel like nowadays it's just sort of like if you're not having instant success or instant victory or whatever, like you're doing something wrong, or you need to buy this, or you need to fix it
Yeah.
in this way. And that's like never how it's been. Like, I don't know, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And it's like this idea, it's like, how do you define victory, right? Like, and I think when you're kind of like working with someone like Nike, or like, developing your own kind of like physical, like physical work to improve your mental health, it's about like measuring victory as like your own personal growth and success. So it's like, I can lift like 10 pounds more on my deadlift this month than I could last month. And that's because of my, dedication to this, my hard work, like my belief in myself, like my attention to my self care.
Mhm.
Like that's what victory is to me.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. What would you say to the witches who are like, no, I do not want to work out or whatever, or do sports? Because I feel like there's probably a pretty good Venn diagram of like people who didn't like sports and people who are witches.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. I would say like you don't have to be like, Miss like Sporty Spice. But I think part of like the importance, I mean, there are so many mental health benefits to like moving your body. So it's like pick an activity that you like and stick with it. And I also think like in terms of moving your body, I think it's also like in respect and reverence to nature, right? Like this idea that like we are not machines, we are animals, we are part of nature. And it's like if you're a witch and like sports aren't your thing, like totally cool. Just like go outside and like lay in some dirt. Like I don't care what you do with your body, just like use it to connect with your spirit, like with the earth, to liminal spaces. And it will be so beneficial to you, your mental health, your practice. Yeah, you're not a
Mm.
machine, like you're not a computer.
Yeah. I think especially nowadays, I just feel that so much where it maybe I don't know if it's like if it's AI or if it's um almost like seeing celebrities be perfect or what it is, but I feel like maybe it's just like late stage capitalism, I'm not really sure, but I just feel like there's such a strange like zeitgeist right now about that, or about like productivity and being perfect and doing things perfectly, or taking medication or a pill or something to make you perfect or whatever it is, right? And I love what you're saying of just like, because it is very witchy of being like, no, like my, my imperfections are what makes me divine, right? Because the world and the earth and everything like that isn't perfect as well.
100%. And like, so I just started reading this incredible book called Little Hidden Doors by another witchy psychotherapist, called Naomi Sangreal. Sorry, I hope I pronounced
Hmm.
that. But like it really talks about this idea that like our modern society, with all of, of course, the amazing technological and industrial advancements that have happened, like those are all good things, right? But like what has sort of happened is it has like detached us from nature and has placed humans in this position where it's almost like we believe ourselves to be above nature. We believe ourselves to be the masters of it and in control of the world, when in reality, like, a lot of ancient civilizations were witchy as hell, and witchy as hell in the sense that they were connected to the earth and natural cycles and connecting with dreams, and had a respect and reverence for them as like connections to the gods, connections to their deceased, connections to the underworld, and this idea that like we are not separate from the earth, we are just a part of it. And so I think that has really kind of gotten lost today. So yeah, like to your point, like connecting with your body and connecting to these practices is sort of like, getting back to this sense that like we're not better than nature. We're just like tiny parts of it. So like have some respect.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So good. So good. Yeah. Do you find, or I guess I should say, like, do you work with like astrology, or kind of like vibe with astrology? Cool. My question is sort of, do you notice like when transits are happening, in terms of like, I've always been curious of like, can you tell by like, seeing your clients or whatever, like, oh yeah, the Mercury retrograde is totally happening right now? Or like, do you feel like you notice, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in your client practice specifically, but do you feel like that's something that you notice in sort of like trends of like, oh yeah, like we're all kind of experiencing this phenomenon right now, and it might be impacting my session, or it might be impacting this or that or something like that?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm perpetually on an astrology learning journey. Like growing up, I was a total math idiot. Like I cannot add, I don't know how numbers work. And for whatever reason, I can't fully understand like astrology has always felt a little bit like mathy to me. Like I don't know, sometimes it just like it's very complex. Sometimes it can go over my head, but I love it and I find it so interesting, and I work with it kind of on a daily basis, but I really need help.
Yeah.
Astrologer to help me like understand like, okay, what does this all mean, or like what's happening? So I always have an awareness with what's going on, although I get some help
Yeah.
understanding it. And then yeah, because a lot of my clients like are witchy and are really into astrology as this way of understanding themselves, and will come in, talking about like, oh, it's my Saturn return, or like,
Mm,
oh, God, this full moon just really took me out. Like, because I have an understanding and appreciation for that, I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. Like, what's going on, and talk about the different placements and how they're kind
mm.
of like reflecting parts of their lives now. So, yeah, like that's another, thing that I think is so therapeutic and helpful, is like understanding your birth chart.
Mm.
It's just like bang, like once you understand all of that and you can bring it into a therapy space, it's like, whoa, it opens up this whole other world of understanding like into yourself, and it just like a framework for kind of knowing who you are.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I know. That's like something that surprised me with astrology because for a very long time I was a tarot reader and I was like, I felt the same way where I was like, too much math, too many calculations. There's too much going on. But then I don't know what like got me into it in particular. I think I just sort of decided that I was gonna like seriously like learn it. This was maybe like 6 or so years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. Um, and it just blew me away where I was like, oh my goodness, this is a pattern that I can see in my, like, this is something that is present in my birth chart as a pattern that's going to sort of perhaps talk about my personality or maybe be something repetitive over my life. Or maybe at one point in my life, I could work with this placement in a more self destructive way. And then I could like learn how to utilize it in a really effective way and whatnot. And now sometimes when I do astrology sessions, I'm almost kind of like, oh damn, like I am like we're going so deep and this is so like into personality and behavior that I'm like, should I go back to school and just get a license or something? Because I almost like feel unqualified sometimes where I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like getting so therapeutic and so like into their psyche.
Yeah, it's so deep. There are so many layers to it. I think it's so helpful. And yeah, it's just such an interesting tool to understand yourself. And like, I really do find it like I'm shocked at the way that like so many people don't think astrology is real. I'm like, you're telling me that when that eclipse happened the other week and the whole world stopped to look at this event that, so that's, the moon and the sun, right? You're telling me that you don't think that the rest of the solar system has an impact on us? Like,
Mm.
again, I think it's this like idea like, oh, we are above nature, like we're above like the world. And it's like, we're just a part of it. Like, Earth is just one planet in the solar system. Like, it's wild to think that like we are not impacted by the other planets.
Yeah. And a lot of what you're saying, is quite consistent with certain topics in like hermeticism and just like the Western esoteric tradition in general, where like the idea of the body being an exercise being really important for the magician. That's something that's emphasized in a lot of Western esoteric occult systems and probably other ones too. And the as above so below is like a hermetic axiom. There's like so many things in there that really just link like the human body, the mind, whatever's going on with the soul and whatnot, and the inner intelligences, the shadow, etc. It really links all of that to both the earth and to the planets. And so this is like, yeah, this is ancient stuff. So I just love that you're doing it in a way that like it makes so much sense to me and it's so integrated for me, but I can see how it almost feels new. Like it's ancient, but it feels new, you know?
Yeah, isn't that wild, right? Like, I feel like the stuff we're saying, this is not anything like revelatory or new. And it's like, how did we get so disconnected, right? From like Earth, its cycles, our bodies, the natural world. Like, yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Um, I'm curious about what you would say in terms of like somebody who might have a history of psychosis or something else, like a mental health history where they're working through something, and then they're also witchy and interested in psychic abilities and things like that. I just find, well, I think first of all, I find that um, I know a lot of witches who have OCD and bipolar and BPD and things like that, where they're just like, maybe part of it is they always kind of felt not super neurotypical and that like led them to the occult or to witchcraft or to those sort of like more subversive things.
Mhm.
um, but I do find it might add a little bit of a difficult layer in terms of how to interact with the divine and how to interact with psychic abilities. So, do you have any advice for those who kind of resonate with that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think something called the circle of care is really important. So it's this idea that when like caring for yourself, whether you have a mental health diagnosis or psychoses or you're neurodivergent, it's this idea of kind of like not putting your eggs in one basket in terms of like where you're going for care or support.
Mhm.
So, if you have, let's say, a diagnosis that could maybe benefit from some medication or a higher level of support, like, of course, like go and talk about your witchiness and spiritual practice, with whoever that is, your, spooky therapist, your tarot reader, your astrologer, whoever that is, like, and go to the doctor, talk to your doctor, right? Get a referral to a psychiatrist. Like we're not all one thing, right? We have parts inside of us. And I think it's really important to tend to all those different parts and make sure they're all being cared for, right? Like you can be, a witchy spiritual person who, connects with deities and astrology and tarot and spell work and all these things. And you may also, have a mental health condition that maybe does require a more like medicalized approach. And those two things do not negate each other. So I think
Mhm.
making sure that you have a really kind of fulsome circle of care in terms of, you know, whether that be mental health professionals, spiritual providers, but also just like straight up like friends and family, in your life who are supportive to you is like really the best way to kind of make sure that all those parts of you are being cared for.
Mm. Yeah, that's really great advice, and that makes so much sense. And I love that. Yeah, just like that diversity and care. That's really helpful.
Mhm.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today and telling us all about your practice, and your career. Is there anything that you wanted to mention sort of about your work, about your offerings, where people can find you? I know you have a podcast, so.
Yeah, so my podcast is Mental Health is Horrifying. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's really fun. It was actually chosen as new and noteworthy by Apple Podcasts a few months ago, so she's chart topping.
Love it.
Give her a listen. Of course, I provide one-on-one psychotherapy to residents of Ontario. I also have my Final Girls Club, which is a rotating series of workshops and courses where we get into psychoeducation, dream work, and kind of spooky topics to support our mental health. I offer tarot readings called the Horror Concierge, where you will receive a tarot reading that is paired with a horror movie, because I believe horror is also a really excellent place to explore your mental health and both explore and lay down your fears. You can find me on Instagram at Many Moons Therapy, or if you ever need me, you can just howl at the moon and I will hear your call.
Yes, that is that is my preferred way of communication.
Right?
I love that. That's the new social media, yeah. Just
Exactly.
howling at the moon.
Let's get that going.
I love that. Amazing. Thank you so much. I had so much fun. I'm sure everybody is like typing your username into their phones, vigorously to follow you. And if you're not, you totally should, because Candice is awesome. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Thanks for tuning into Diaries of a Witch podcast, and goodbye.